Hi, everyone. This is Sam Silverman, Managing Partner of EB-5AN. Thank you for taking time to join us on today's webinar. Today, we're going to be discussing EB-5 source of funds, best practices, and common problems in Spanish, with a focus on investors from Latin America who are interested in investing in EB-5 visa investment projects. If you want to request a copy of the slides, please email us at info@eb5an.com, and we'll be happy to send over a copy of the slides. This is a short table of contents overview of the topics we're going to cover during today's webinar. First, we'll start with a short introduction about EB-5AN. We'll introduce our guest panelist. We'll speak generally about source of funds considerations for investors from Latin American countries. We'll go through a real case study for a Latin American investor, and then we'll spend a few minutes at the end speaking about our Twin Lakes, Georgia rural EB-5 investment project. A little bit more about EB-5AN. We're a national leading EB-5 investment fund manager. We've worked with thousands of EB-5 investors over the last 10 years from more than 60 different countries. This is a map showing where many of our prior investors have come from, and as you can see, we've got quite a few investors from Latin America. This is another map showing the USCIS EB-5 regional center licenses that we have approved in the United States, and as you can see, we cover most of the United States. As I mentioned earlier, I'm Sam Silverman, one of the two managing partners of EB-5AN. My background bio is here on the left-hand side, and my partner Mike Schoenfeld there on the right side. And now we'll take a few minutes and introduce our guest panelist. So today we're very fortunate to have Claudia Jimenez from David Herson and Partners with us. Claudia is a very experienced EB-5 immigration attorney who's worked with many EB-5 investors from Latin America, and I'll let her jump in and introduce herself and share a little bit about her experience practicing law with EB-5, specifically with investors from Latin American countries.
Hi, Sam. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm really excited to talk to you a little bit more about the Latin American market and specifically in the EB-5 industry. As you mentioned, my firm, David Herson and Partners, we specialize in EB-5. We've been in the industry for a long time. And I come to complement to try to explore the EB-5 industry in Latin America. Me in specific, I'm also an attorney in Mexico, which gives me a specific skill to be able to analyze documents and legal documents that come from Latin America to see if they meet the requirements for the EB-5. The most important for us is, one, make sure that this is the best strategy for the investors and their families, and two, that they know how to do it and what documents immigration will be expecting to see in order to prove or guarantee an approval or see how strong the case is.
All right, now we're going to jump into the first topic, an overview of EB-5 source of funds. So, Claudia, what is source of funds and how does it fit in with the EB-5 investment program, and why do investors need to be concerned about making sure this is done correctly if they're interested in making an EB-5 visa investment?
The source of funds is one of the main elements of this category. This is an excellent question. Once a strategy is the best for you and your family, the next step is to make sure that you have a clear or a convincing source of funds. Where does it come, the source of funds? The law requires us that the investment, the money that the investor will invest into this project, has to be his or hers and has to be from listed or legal activities. This goes back to the soul of this program, of this law, that the intention of this law is to generate the economy through generation of employment, to help the economy of the US. So it's very important for the US that there is a screening process of the investment money to make sure that not only this money is the investors' money, but it's money that comes from legal activities. If we can prove this with 51% certainty, we have a strong case. The important thing here is truly analyze those documents, because most of this money will come from outside the US, or the origins, even if the money is inside the US, the origins of this money, or the true source of this money, will be outside the US. Those documents and understand the legal system of your country to make sure if any exception applies throughout the proof of these source of funds.
Great. All right, let's move on and talk specifically about the different types of fund sources that you see commonly used by investors. These are some of the most common sources of funds for EB-5 investment. Let's spend a few minutes talking about each one, and specifically how investors from Latin America need to think about documenting these different sources.
Thank you, Sam. That is such an important point, because in the end, it doesn't matter how strong the project will be if you don't have your source of funds figured out. One of the most common source of funds, we will always fund the ordinary income. This refers to the salary of the person and the money that they have been making throughout their employment. Usually with this type of source of funds, we will be able to trace it with Social Security records, employment records, and income tax return, where it shows how much money the person has been making throughout the year that amount to the $800,000 of investment that is required necessary for this type of, or this project in specific. The next one that is very common is capital gains. But what is a capital gain? Let me explain it to you, because sometimes people will think about capital gain just when it's through companies. But truthfully, this also refers to the sales of real estate and the money that comes out of that sale. The information and the documents that we will need, let's think that the person or the investor is getting the $800,000 to invest out of the profits of a sale of a real estate. Regardless if the real estate property is in the U.S. or outside the U.S., we will need to submit documentation regarding the ownership of that real estate, because let's remember that we have to prove that this money is the investor. So, and as well, in capital gains, we also see a lot of companies that investors will use their dividends or their stocks or their shares in their companies to invest this money into the EB-5 industry or EB-5 project. The other very common source of funds that we see in Latin America are gifts or inheritance. This gift or inheritance can be from family or friends, and there is a process depending on which one you prefer. A lot of people lean towards the gifts. When someone is gifting the amount of $800,000, it can be the complete amount or partial amount. But once a gift has been made, we have to make sure that this gift, depending on where it was, if it is within the U.S. or outside the U.S., that complies with the laws of the local law. So if there is any taxation or taxes that needs to be paid out of that gift or out of that inheritance, all of that has to be paid before we can use that money. The same, we will need to provide information of where that money comes from. Now we know that that has been gifted to you or it has been inherited to you, but we also need to provide information of the person that is gifting it, how that person obtained that money. And because that is truthfully the source of funds of the investment, we have to always follow the money. There's another one that is becoming more and more common in the source of funds world, specifically for Latin America. These are the loans for family and friends or companies even, and these can be secure or insecure or unsecure loans. This means that either your family, friends, or your own company or other company will loan you the money with certain conditions. When this happens, we also have to look into the regulations of the local law to make sure that this loan complies with the regulations of the country and the local law in general. If the money comes from a friend, it's a family or a friend or a company, we also have to explain where the money comes from. It's not only necessary to provide the loan document, we also need to do a source of funds report of that money and the person that is, or the company that is gifting it to you. In the end, one of the things that is the most important is when you're determining if this is the best strategy for you, you need to talk to an immigration attorney that will be able to explore the different avenues that you can use to use your source of funds. It's really important that everything is analyzed before you make any decision or move any money around.
Great. All right. Now let's jump into more specifics on each of these major sources of funds and talk about what are some of the best practices and some of the most common questions that you see from Latin American investors for each one, starting with ordinary income.
Perfect. Now let's talk about a little bit more in a specific about the challenges that each one of these avenues will present. Typically, we see in Latin America. Let's start with the ordinary income. For ordinary income, traditionally, we will have two different avenues. Either you are employed and you have an employer that will have all of the records, or you're self-employed and allocate yourself a salary. For these, both, it depends on how you receive your money, if you're self-employed or employed by a third party. If you have a company, likely we will be able to find pay stubs, employment contracts, and confirmation letters, as well as bank statements from direct deposit. We will need to look into the total amount that is being invested. In this case, it will be $800,000. And so we have to prove those $800,000. It's something very important that I would like to mention, that for USCIS or for immigration, we only have to prove the investment money, the $800,000. We don't have to go into your overall wealth. However, we have to be conscious that if there is more money involved in the bank account that we will present, they might ask further questions. But for that, we will know in advance if USCIS will have an interest of knowing more after your attorney review your documents. If you are self-employed, this will go depending on where you live. Mexico has very specific rules about being self-employed, and you are required to report with the Social Security the money that you make. That will be a very, very, very good way of proving your salary and your income if you are self-employed. There's other sources of funds where we can find if you're self-employed. We will have to provide the documents of your company and that is properly registered, and to prove that it has enough, that it exists, and that you have been employed and you have been receiving that salary that has to amount to the $800,000, which is the total investment for this project. And well, we can go to the next one.
Great. So continuing to talk about ordinary income, what are some of the problems that you see investors run into that you need to make sure get corrected before finally submitting a petition to the USCIS?
Yeah, well, with ordinary income, one of the main issues that I've seen and observed in Latin America is sometimes the records with the tax security system is not accurate to the income that they are receiving in their bank account. So an assessment of every single document will be necessary to make sure that we are providing USCIS documents that do not contradict each other. In Mexico, there is a few, as well as many other countries in Latin America, there are a few exceptions when it comes to ordinary income. Not everybody is request or require, or better said, that there's exceptions for you not to have to declare all of your income or report all of the income. So we will have to look into the specific on each case and make sure specifically that the bank statements that we're receiving coincide with the Social Security records or payroll records if they provide any.
Great. All right, now let's shift over to the second major source of funds, capital gains, and spend a little more time digging into the details there.
Thank you so much. Well, this is one of the main source of funds that I've seen specifically for Mexico and Chile, and it's the capital gains. These we discussed earlier that these are two main pillars for these type of source of funds. One of them is the sale of a real estate property, and the other one is sale of a company as well. In Latin America, we need to look into what are the requirements to register either a property or a company and make sure that we are complying with those. Sometimes they tend to be different than in the US, as well with providing the documents of the registration of either the property or the company. We also have to provide the financial documents to make sure and prove that you not only have the property or the company, but that you have also been paying your responsibility, your fiscal responsibility with the country. In Latin America, in terms of the taxes, we find a lot of exceptions as well for properties and for companies, and sometimes we will not be able to find a clear trace of all of the documents that we need. This not necessarily means that the person or the investor will not be able to apply for an EB-5. This just means that maybe their country have certain exceptions that we as an attorneys, we have to get involved and understand, because it is our job to explain USCIS how the law works in other countries sometimes. One of the main issues that I've seen and observed with my Latino clients in this specific source of funds, with a real property in a specific, when the property is old or it's a property that has been in the family for generations, it's sometimes really challenging to find the source, the origins of this real property. The registry in each country, it's different. The process of registration is different. It is not the same to register a property in the city that registering in a small town. We found that many times, especially in countries like Costa Rica, Chile, Venezuela, or in Mexico as well, we don't have a clear path, or we don't even have a record, proper record, or it was destroyed. When this happens, it's very important that we get in contact with professionals from that country to understand, or even with the same registry, to understand what happened, and that it was not the investors under the investors' control to keep those documents. We just have to prove with a 51% certainty that this is the investors, and that it comes from illicit activities. So even though it can be challenging, it can definitely be proven even when we don't have proper registration sometimes.
Great. All right, let's shift over to talk about some of the common problems that come up as well.
Okay. There is a few challenges or problems that we face when we're talking about capital gains. One of them is definitely the translation of the foreign documents. This is where having an attorney that not only speaks your language, but understands your culture and the legal documents in your own country and your language is very important. Because this way, we will avoid to translate maybe thousands of pages that may not be necessary. Being able to review and make sure that the documents that we need are the only ones that are being translated are definitely a huge plus. We recommend that you go with someone that understands 100% your source of funds in order to be able to explain it to USCIS. One of the challenges that I see specifically with Mexico will be the proper appropriation or the proper record of the taxes and making sure that everything has been paid. Taxes is something very particular. Each country has their own set of rules. It's very important. In my experience, I really like working with the CPA or the accountant of the investor to make sure that not only I am receiving the best information and documents that I can, but that I can ask the proper questions and understand where the source of funds come from. Tracking these source of funds is the most important thing for the EB-5 from the investor's point of view. Once they decide the project, it's important that we make sure not only that the money is theirs, but that they have paid their dues in their own home country before they want to use this money as the source of their investment.
Great. All right. Now let's shift over to gifts and inheritance and talk about some of the major things that investors should be aware of when considering sourcing money from gifts or inheritance.
Okay. Perfect. So let's talk about a little bit the intricacies about the inheritance and when it's a good idea to use inheritance as a source of funds. And we'll leave gifts by the end, which I think it's a little bit more simple than the inheritance. But specifically in Latin America, we see this instrument being used less and less because of the challenges that are presented and the amount of documents that we need to provide. When the money comes from an inheritance, we have to prove that the inheritance happened. Usually for Latin America, we will have an order signed by a judge. There has to be a process in place. And with that order, there has to be a distribution of the funds and the inheritance. And we need to prove as well that that amount of money or the money that you're receiving or property that you're receiving out of the inheritance, it was transferred to you. In addition to that, we also have to prove where the person obtained this property or this money, and because that's truly the source of funds of the income. With the years, I find the inheritance being one of the least used tools for source of funds in Latin America, because it's difficult to be able to find all of the traces and the documentary evidence that we need. It all comes down to the process, the legal process in your own country. Usually when I find cases that involve inheritance, we already request from the get-go the sentence from the judge where it shows that the money has been properly transferred to you, and as well as if it is cash, as well as the money transferred from the either trust fund to your personal account or even to the account to the project, if that's the case. If you use things, there's been situations, very common situations, where I see inheritance money being used. And this is when the person obtained the money from an inheritance and then either invested in a real estate or in a company, and out of that company or the profits of the sale of that real estate, that's what is being used for the source of funds. If that's the case, we still have to get into the inheritance part and prove that that money was legally transferred to you according to the laws of your country. The other side of this tool or avenue that is inheritance, we also have another instrument that is called the gift. And this is one of the main instruments that I've seen used in the EB-5, specifically when it comes from like either a younger investor or someone that doesn't want to use or doesn't have their own investment amount on their own. The instrument of the gift is rather simple than other instruments. However, we still have to trace and prove the source of funds of that gift. So it really depends on the person that is gifting you the amount of money and how much it is. We have to prove where that money comes from, how that person makes that money. And again, we have to prove that that money is that person's money and that it comes from legal activities.
Great. All right. So let's now talk about some of the common problems that come up. You touched on a couple of these issues briefly, but let's cover some of the kind of most common ones that you see clients trying to deal with.
Okay, this is such a good question because in this area regarding gifts and inheritance, I find a lot of challenges by investors to try to prove, especially if it is from inheritance. As I mentioned earlier, it's very important that we look into the laws, local laws of your country or where the inheritance took place. Likely, this will be in the country of origin of the investor, and we have to make sure that the inheritance was actually went through every single instance and paid all of the taxes and fees associated with a transaction like that. One of the main issues that I see in Latin America is either that we are not able to find records. We're able to find records of inheritance, but we're not able to find records of the source of funds of that inheritance. And that sometimes, depending on when the person obtained and what asset was obtained, that is the type of document that we will need to provide.
Great. All right, now let's shift over to the final major source of funds for EB-5 investors from Latin America, loans. What are some of the main things that investors need to be aware of if they're going to consider using a loan to fund a portion of their EB-5 investment?
Perfect. This is my personal favorite, one of the best ways that I think, especially for Latin America, to prove the source of funds of your investment. If your source of funds comes from a loan, there's a few considerations that we need to have. First, we need to see where the loan took place and where the money is, who is giving you the money, and we need to prove and explain a little bit more about the relationship. Second, we need to see the conditions of this loan. How much you're going to be paying, if it is a secure loan or an insecure or without securities. We can definitely dive into the specifics of what else is going to be required if this is a secure loan. Again, like once the loan is made, one of the main things that we need to remember is that we also need to do a source of funds depending where the money comes from. If the loan, the same as the gift, we need to look into the person that is loaning you the money and ask the questions. How did you obtain the money? Where did the money come from? And making sure that the person had paid taxes on the amount that they have, that they actually have the money, that the money is them to loaned, and that it comes from illicit activities. And specifically in Latin America, one of the things or the challenges that we're gonna face with this that I've seen more common is when we have a secure loan and they secure the loan with, let's say, a real estate property in their home country. We also need to look into the ownership of that real estate property. How do you obtain that property? If it is a possibility for the investor to obtain a loan that doesn't come with a security, this will be the ideal situation, because then we only need to prove the source of funds of the money that is being loaned, and not necessarily we don't have to prove anything else beyond that. In addition to this, we also have to look into the repayment of this loan and make sure that the investor will be able to comply with what money he or she is going to use to repay this loan. One of the things that is very important to mention is that these loans not only have to come from a family, friends, or employers. This could also come from a bank. A lot of my clients, they already have a very good standing with many banks in their home countries, and they're able not only to get a loan from a bank, but also a loan without security. If that is the possibility or an option for an investor, is something that I would definitely recommend to look into.
Great. All right, now let's chat about some of the common problems.
Perfect. So one of the main problems that I usually see with loans from third parties is, specifically if these are secure loans, we have to also explain the property or the asset that is being used to secure that loan. If it is, I have friends, investors and companies that, clients that they will invest their money and they will secure it with either stocks or real estate investment, regardless of what are you using, what asset are you using to secure your loan, we have to explain your ownership to that asset, and we have to explain where that asset comes from as well, because that is part of your source of funds. So it's one of the main issues that I see with my clients in Latin America, when sometimes they will secure these loans with properties that are not traceable or easily traceable.
Great. All right, now we're going to shift gears and talk through a real case study for an investor who's borrowing funds against a piece of real estate from one of his friends. So here on the right side, we see a friend who is a U.S. national who owns and operates a digital consulting business and has made money and is now giving a loan secured by a piece of real estate in Mexico City to an investor who's looking to make an EB-5 investment here on the left side. So Claudia, maybe starting with number 1 and going through 7, do you want to kind of walk us through what types of documents and records and things are going to be needed to make this all work?
Yeah, of course, I'll be happy to. Okay, so from the point of view from the investor, one of the main things that we have to have in order are the main documents: passport, birth certificate, driver license. That is one of the main things. But getting into the investment, in this specific case, we have a friend of an EB-5 investor that is a U.S. national and that owns a company, a digital consulting company. And the person is sending the $800,000, if I understand your chart correctly, to the multifamily apartment building in Mexico. And the investor will use that money as collateral in a loan. So in this case, one of the things that we need to prove is that it is a real asset, right? So in number 2, we have the current appraisal showing, we need to show how much the asset actually is valued at right now. We also need to prove how the investor got it, because you could have invested 10,000 pesos or $10,000, and now the value of the property is 100,000. We don't need to prove the 100,000. The 100,000 are already proven by the increment and the value and the equity, depending if it is a real estate investment. But we only need to prove the origins of the original investment, which is the 10,000 pesos or $10,000. That's what we need to prove. In this case, we know that through the digital consulting business, the friend of the EB-5 investor submitted the profits from his business, invested $800K through a 10-year mortgage loan in a market interest rate on a multifamily apartment in Mexico. So one of the things that we will need is the information on how the friend of the EB-5 investor, the transfer of the money. We need to prove how the company, the digital company exists, that the friend has ownership of that company the same way that it has ownership of the money that that company generated, and it has the discretion and the authorization of the company to actually direct the funds from the company to the investment in the multifamily apartment. In the end, if all of the investment amount, the $800,000, comes from the investment of this multifamily apartment, that is the source of funds. So it will go back to the business of the friend of the EB-5 investor to make sure that, 1, it's a registered business, 2, that the friend of the EB-5 investor has ownership, 3, that it actually has the capital to invest the money that it says that it invested in the multifamily apartment. We need to understand how much exactly was paid for that investment and how much money is valued now. And if the money is enough, if this is the only source of funds and this is the only money that we will need to invest in the project, this will be the trace of social fund that we need to prove. Along with that, of course, we need to provide the financial documents for the U.S. company. If this company, the digital consulting company that will be registering in the U.S., then we will need to prove that it complies with the regulations of a company here.
All right, now let's talk a little bit about the source of funds cover letter. What is this letter, and how does it fit together with all of the documents that an investor is going to need to explain and share with USCIS for approval?
Thank you, Sam. Well, this is one of the most important components of the EB-5 filing. The source of funds cover letter is basically what is going to memorialize the story of your money, of your source of funds. Here we're gonna explain detail by detail every single one of the transactions of your money until the moment it got to the project trust fund or to the project's account. One of the reasons why this is so important is because one of the main elements for this program, for the EB-5, as we remember, is to prove, one, that the investment is the investors, and two, that the investment comes from illicit activities. These arguments will be contained here in this cover letter. We need to provide evidence of every single step that how the money was transferred. We need to submit evidence and documentary evidence of how the money went from the actual project all the way of where the money was originated from. This type of cover letters, it could be somewhere between a few pages all the way to 12, 20 pages. It really all depends on where your money comes from. And we will need to tie every single argument with documentary evidence that prove all of the movement of the money. This is one of the main requirements for the filings and one of the reasons why it's so important to involve an attorney that is able to convey the right message to USCIS. Always having in mind that if you're dealing with transactions that happen in other countries, that you have to be aware, the attorney has to be aware of how the law in that country plays and how it's applied in order to explain it to USCIS in case that there is some document that you cannot find. We need to explain it. Not having a document does not disqualify you for filing for an EB-5. It's just very important that your attorney review if there is any exception in your country that will still allow you to have a clear source of funds as well as a clear path of funds where you will demonstrate with evidence where the money comes from.
Okay, perfect. And this is just an example list of some of the types of documents that an investor may need to provide for the source of funds cover letter. And obviously this is going to vary based on the source of funds an investor is using, but just to give you an idea of the types of documents and the volume that is going to be expected. All right, and now we'll spend a few minutes chatting about our Twin Lakes, Georgia rural EB-5 loan project, and then we'll speak with Claudia again at the end for just a few minutes to wrap up. So the Twin Lakes, Georgia project follows 14 prior EB-5AN Coulter EB-5 projects. Coulter is one of the largest developers in the southeastern United States. They've done more than 24 billion of development over the last 25 plus years. This is an array of some of the prior EB-5AN Coulter projects that we've successfully executed on up until now. Under the current EB-5 laws that went into effect about a year and a half ago, investors who are already in the United States, those here already on H-1B, E-2, F-1, and L-1 visas, can now concurrently file, which means that if you're in the US already on one of these visa categories, in addition to applying for the green card following your EB-5 investment, you can also request a flexible work permit or EAD, employment authorization document, and a travel authorization document. And we're seeing these documents get issued in just a few months, which means that you can have complete employment flexibility in just a few months from making an EB-5 investment while waiting for the green card to be issued. This is a major improvement for investors already in the US and is available as long as the country of birth of that investor is current on the visa bulletin. And as of September 2023. It's current for all countries. A little bit more about the Twin Lakes, Georgia project. It's a large active adult single family home community project with amenities. There's 1,300 homes total, and out of the 1,300 homes, more than 550 have already been sold, and over 400 have already been completed and delivered to buyers. On the left-hand side here, you can see a recent construction photo showing an overview of the project. Coulter as a company has over 20,000 developed and in-process homes. This project will create almost 7,000 EB-5 jobs. As of June 2023, more than 2,000 EB-5 jobs have already been created, which means that more than the 10 required jobs are already in place for each $800,000 EB-5 investor. This project is located in a rural targeted employment area, which means that investors who select the Twin Lakes project get faster priority processing for their green cards and access to the 20% visa set aside. Twin Lakes, Georgia is one of 13 Crestwind branded active adult communities. Coulter is developing all of these communities. Some are already completed, and it just goes to show that this is a proven successful business model that Coulter has successfully executed on across the southeastern United States. This project also features 3 unique safety features from a parent company of Coulter, KL Holdco, an EB-5 loan repayment guarantee, which secures the repayment of the funds, an I-5260 approval refund guarantee, which provides for accelerated repayment of EB-5 funds if the I-5260 petition is not approved for any reason, and also a job creation guarantee. Coulter is the #1 developer in the active adult single-family home market in the Atlanta area. When we look at the sales statistics for 2022, we see that Coulter has sold more homes than any other individual developer in this market, including some of the largest publicly traded home builders in the United States. Lennar and Pulte Group are 2 of the largest home builders, even larger than Coulter. And what's interesting here is that just 2 months ago, Warren Buffett invested almost $1 billion across Lennar and D.R. Horton. And that's really relevant because Warren Buffett, like Coulter, also sees the opportunity to invest in an industry where there's a housing shortage and where active developers like Coulter, Lennar, D.R. Horton are actively, meeting an unmet demand. And Warren Buffett thinks that's a good place for his money. And so, as an EB-5 investor, you'd be, basically investing along the same investment thesis that there's a very strong US housing market, particularly with new construction of single-family homes over the next few years. For those investors who are not local and won't be able to easily visit the Twin Lakes project, you can watch our new virtual driving tour that we just published recently on our website. However, if you are interested in visiting the project in person, please reach out to us. The sales office is open 7 days a week, and we'd be happy to coordinate a personalized visit for you to come visit and see the project in person. These are a few more recent construction photographs of the project. And here we can see a whole new street being cleared for infrastructure before home building commences in this area. Also available on our website, we have a number of EB-5 investor testimonials, so you can log in and watch and read transcripts of investors explain why they chose to invest in the Twin Lakes Rural Project after identifying and reviewing a number of other available projects in the market. And these are some more of those testimonials, and they're all available to watch and read on our website. All right, before we wrap up, I want to turn it back over to Claudia and have her share kind of a short summary of why a lot of her clients, particularly those from Latin America, why are they interested in EB-5? What makes it a good investment for themselves and their family? What's the value of doing it? And then if they are interested in getting more information on whether or not they could qualify for an EB-5 investment, what's the process for that to get in touch with you, Claudia.
Thank you so much, Sam. It would be my pleasure to explain a little bit why I think the EB-5 category is an excellent category for you and your family. This is a category that will not only allow you to come to the U.S. under a residency and will give you the ability to work and travel, but you also are going to be able to bring your spouse and children under the age of 21 that are single. This is a category that it is not only to provide you with a green card, but you are being part of the economy of the U.S. This category comes from a law that the main purpose is to help the economy of the U.S. through generation of employment. And being part of it is, in my opinion, one of the main reasons to be part of the EB-5 category. The benefit that you can obtain compared to other immigrant categories is pretty Latin. You will have residency as well as your family. You don't have to go through the intricacies of employment categories or be attached to having to work with an employer in a specific. This is a category that will give you not only freedom, but also the personal satisfaction of knowing that you are part of the U.S. economy. I'm really happy to bring awareness into the Latino community that this is an actual strategy for you and your family. And in many cases, this will be the best strategy for you, especially for those individuals that still have companies or responsibilities on their country that may not be allowed or it's not feasible for them to work for an employer here. The freedom that it gives you, knowing that that your money is as secure as it can be with a reputable regional center, and having the ability to give your children the possibility to study in the U.S. Without the necessity of getting a student visa or having to pay outstate tuition. There is many benefits that I feel brings into the equation when someone is considering the EB-5. Many people may feel discouraged by the amount of investment, but that risk of that is associated with this type of investment is usually mitigated by collaborating with regional centers like EB-5 affiliated networks that have been working in this industry for many years and successfully help families and individual investors to come safely to the U.S. I'm just going to say that if you have any questions in trying to determine if this is the best strategy for you and your family, please contact us. We will be more than happy to talk to you to make sure that this is the best strategy for you, and that with a regional center like affiliated EB-5 affiliated network, that your investment and your immigration goals will be the most important thing for everybody.
Great. Thank you very much, Claudia. Really appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and yeah, look forward to working together on many more clients.
Perfect. Me too. Thank you so much, Sam.